Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll just give this a moment as everyone kind of joins the session, but welcome and thanks for jumping online today. Some people will probably continue to join us as we get going, but I'll kick off now. We've got about an hour for this session. It might not take that long potentially, but we will work through a number of things today. So we want to make sure we can cover everything and allow some time for questions at the end. So we will get rolling pretty quickly. So yeah, thank you for joining us. My name is Patrick McCarthy. I'm the Executive Director of the Victorian Association of Performing Arts Centres. And the session you've just logged into, as I'm sure you're aware, is an information session regarding Showcase Victoria 2023, which we're very excited about, and lovely to have so many people already jumping online, keen to learn more about the event. Before we kick off today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm joining you from, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also extend those respects to the elders and traditional owners of the lands that you're all joining from, wherever you may be around the continent or elsewhere today as well, and also pay those respects, extend those respects to any First Nations people that may be in this session with us today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So you're welcome to have your cameras on or off, whatever you feel most comfortable with. If you can, you should all be muted when you've joined, but if you can remain muted unless you're asking a question at the end of the session, that'd be appreciated, just in terms of logistics of running a webinar like this. If you do have any questions throughout today's session, would encourage you to put them in the chat function, and we will answer all questions at the end of the session. We'll circle back to anything that has been raised. It may be answered along the way, so we'll keep everything questions to the end of today's session after all the presentations, but please feel free to use that chat function freely. We are recording today's session, so just be aware if you are on camera or if you're talking or anything like that, just be aware that we're recording it. It will be posted on the VAPAC and Regional Arts Victoria websites or YouTube channels, just for reference for anyone that hasn't been able to make this session today. So just let you know that as a matter of courtesy. Today's session, we're going to cover a number of aspects around the expression of interest process for Showcase Victoria, and putting forward your production or project for consideration as part of that, as well as some broader information around what Showcase is. We know that there's lots of experienced people in this session. I see lots of familiar names, people that have engaged with us previously or experienced in the sector, but we know some people may be new, brand new to touring as well. And so we just want to make sure we give you as much information as we can about what to expect going through the EOI process. And then if you are to be involved in Showcase, and give you as much information to put together a successful application as possible. I will just quickly introduce the other people that will be presenting today. So if you've just joined and you missed my introduction at the start, I'm the Executive Director of VAPAC, and I'm joined today by Bindi Green, who's the Manager of Touring at Regional Arts Victoria. Bindi, give a little bit of a wave. Adam Fawcett, who's the Communications Coordinator at Regional Arts Victoria, a lot of you will know as well, and Celia Wordsworth, who's just joined VAPAC as of this week as producer of Showcase Victoria 2023. Some of you, if you've been engaged previously, remember Celia was producer on the 2020 version before it very sadly couldn't go ahead for obvious reasons. So we're really pleased to have Celia back with us to see the event through to fruition in 2023. We are joined by some other members of the RAV team as well today. And if they have any questions, Luth and Annie, who are part of the touring team, I'm sure can jump in and answer some of those as well if they come up. In today's session, we're going to cover a few things. So I'll give a bit of a general overview of Showcase Victoria and what to expect of the event this year, because it will be a little bit different to what has happened the last few years. And also a bit of an overview of the expressions of interest process and how we go about selecting productions and projects to be part of the official program for Showcase Victoria. I'll then have Adam will talk through a little bit about the marketing side of your EOI and what to consider, and some kind of tips and advice for what sort of things you want to prepare and how to do that well. Bindi will talk a little bit about the technical side of submitting an EOI, so what your technical requirements might be for your production, what information we ask for as part of the EOI, and what additional information you may want to submit as support material for consideration by the selection panel. And then Celia will talk a little bit about budgets at the end, just some consideration. We don't ask for a lot of budget information at this stage, but if you're new to touring, you might not be sure about how to come up with the figures that you need to include. So we're just going to give you a little bit of information about that as well. And then I'll give you a little bit of a pointer towards some further resources on the Showcase website, some things to make use of that may be helpful as you prepare your EOI. So if you are new to all of this, and you might be asking, what is Showcase Victoria? You might have seen our call out in the last week or so, or you might have been recommended to this session by a colleague or something similar. But Showcase Victoria is our state's premier touring market. It is a performing arts touring market that is designed to connect artists and producers with venues and presenters around the state. And it's a really crucial part of our performing arts ecology and the touring sector in particular, in that it provides an opportunity for venues, which is what VAPAC represents, to go out and find shows and productions that they want to bring to where they are to share with audiences in their community. And that's a really fundamental part of what VAPAC does. It's a really fundamental part of what Regional Arts Victoria do. And we know that there's so many incredible artists and producers working not just in Victoria, but all around the country that are looking for audiences to connect with and engage with. And Showcase provides a really useful tool to do that. I will say it is by no means the only way to do that. It's not the only way to engage with venues. It's not the only way to find an audience for your work. It is one avenue to do that that we've been doing quite well for a number of years. But it is one option that you can explore other avenues as well. And there is always support through the VAPAC network and RAV for artists to be able to do that if you aren't successful through this EOI process as well, because inevitably we do have more people apply to be part of the program than we can accept, usually on a standard year with a full format. As we are doing this year, we may receive around maybe 150 applications for potentially maybe up to 50 spots. So it just gives you some idea of the kind of interest and what our capacity is as well. But really, it's an event that is about connecting people that are looking to tour with programming opportunities for future seasons at performing arts venues. Last year and the year before, we delivered reduced capacity one-day event versions of Showcase Victoria. Last year, it was really about reconnecting. The sector had not really been together much for the last 2 years prior to that. So we had a lot of networking time and a lot of opportunity for some discussions about the state of the sector and how we would move forward in terms of touring and other aspects. We did have online profiles, but we didn't have any kind of pitching or excerpts on the day. 2021, there was some pitching, but no excerpts in terms of live performances of work. And as I mentioned earlier, the 2020 event sadly couldn't go ahead due to the pandemic. We are very pleased that in 2023, we will, for the first time since 2019, return to the full format of Showcase Victoria. So it will feature excerpts, live performances, excerpts of works, as well as pictures of productions, which may either be existing or new works. There will be networking time. There may be other aspects we're working on the program at the moment, and we'll announce that in due course. But it will be back to the full 2-day format that some of you who've been around for a while will have experienced in years past. We did this based on feedback from the sector. We know that artists and producers want to get their work in front of venues, and we know that presenters really love the opportunity to hear directly from artists in terms of pictures and also see work in the form of excerpts as well. So we have done quite a bit of work to make this possible to come back in 2023 back to the full format. So it will be held over 2 days at the Drum Theatre in Dandenong, which we're really excited about. One of the great venues in the VAPAC network, a beautiful theatre, and a great team out there in Dandenong in a really great community as well. So May 9th and May 10th, if you haven't seen those dates yet, is when Showcase will happen this year. Expressions of interest are currently open, as you will have seen. They close at 11:59 p.m. on February 6th. That we are running this EOI period later this year. I did have some inquiries before the holidays from people a little bit anxious about when they were going to be opening. And just as an explainer for anyone who wasn't aware of that, previously we would have opened them maybe in December and closed them in January, but we're really keen this year to make sure that we weren't imposing an expectation on artists and producers that they'd be working on EOIs over the holiday period. I know some people are still on holidays and some people may be working all the way through, but we wanted to provide at least an opportunity for people to switch off a little bit before kind of getting back into these sorts of applications for this year. So that's why it's run a little bit later this time around. In terms of what we're looking for, it is really everything across the performing arts. It covers really all art forms. We have interest from venues across all kind of genres and forms of work. Predominantly, and if you've done any kind of homework researching what performing arts centres present, there are some kind of consistent items that come up in terms of the need for art forms, in terms of comedy and drama and cabaret and circus, but really kind of all art forms are under consideration. And we do have people present experimental work, or work that is installation based, or work that is can be performed in outdoor spaces or in kind of non-traditional spaces. It is really quite a broad remit, and we don't want to say we don't want anything, because we really want to provide everyone with the opportunity to put their hand up if they're interested in touring. The selection process is that we have a committee of industry representatives that will assess the EOIs, and that is made up largely of representatives who work in programming space in performing arts venues, but we have some representatives from other parts of the sector as well, to make sure that we have a broad cross-section of expertise on the panel. But it's really about putting together a program of work that we think is going to have a good chance of getting picked up at Showcase by enough venues to put together viable tours, but also that is going to provide enough variety in terms of scale and style of work and content to really provide a diverse and representative program of work for venues to choose from in their programming decisions as well. I might just go quickly now through the EOI form, just to give a little bit of explanation. Hopefully, most of you will have looked at the EOI form already. Hopefully, you can see that form now. Is that right? Someone gives me a nod. Yes.
Yep, we can see that, Patrick.
Great, thank you. So you can see here, apply to present at Showcase Victoria 2023. This is the form on the Showcase Victoria website, which is showcasevictoria.com.au. We've linked to some key resources here. So I'll go through this later, but touches on some frequently asked questions and resources that you can use as part of your application, and also the selection guidelines, and I'll touch on those in a moment as well. But the form is pretty self-explanatory. We ask for some general contact information for whoever your main contact is. So please put in there whoever, if we need to contact you to talk about your EOI or about your project, if we have further questions or anything like that, make that the person you put in here. There's some general information about the project, the company, and the key artists involved. Duration of work is really important because artists like to know that. And there's a field here where you can put in great information about your creative team. Keep things as brief as possible, just whatever information is really necessary for someone to get a clear picture of what your production is. There's some tick boxes here, and I will just mention, hopefully you can see there, they kind of highlight when you tick them. They kind of all appear ticked, but they turn bold when you click them as per that sentence there. So just tick whichever apply to your production. Show status is basically just telling us whether the show has had a season before or not. So some shows will come to Showcase when they've had a premiere season, perhaps last year, or maybe they're premiering now and looking to tour in maybe 2024 or 2025, for instance. Some works may not have premiered yet. They may be due to premiere later this year, but wanting to explore touring options. So we just want to get an idea of where your show is at, because that will not necessarily impact whether you get in or not, but it just gives us an idea of what sort of support material you might be able to provide, and where the production is at in terms of its journey towards production, or how long ago it was on as well. There's some information here around fees, and I'll let Celia cover that a little bit later. Synopsis of a work, we've asked people to keep that relatively brief, about 200 words. Adam might touch a little bit on synopsis stuff as part of marketing, but really that's an opportunity just to give us a really kind of short, sharp picture of what your show is. And this is really the first thing that the panel will read about your production. So it's important that this is really strong and really clear, and tells us what your show is, so that it can kind of stick in the minds of the assessors when they're making their decision. So do put a bit of time into that. Touring and tech, Bindi will cover some of this later, but we ask for dates about when you're available to tour, so touring windows and so forth. So it might be that you're available to tour in the first half of 2024, or from May to September 2024, or whatever it may be. As much information as you can put in there and as clear as you can be makes it easier for venues to program you. Information really about kind of touring party, how much bump in time, and what size stage. Binny will cover that in a little bit more detail later. There's some information here about access requirements. So we do ask first up about access requirements to participate in Showcase. We're really committed at VAPAC and at RAV to make sure that Showcase is accessible and inclusive as possible. We really want to make sure that any needs that anyone has to participate in the event can be planned for and met. So we ask for that information up front. That's really just to make sure we can try and give you as good an experience as possible if you're participating in the Showcase program. And we also ask for some information around accessibility for when you may be touring later on as well. Again, that's just in order for people to be able to plan for that and give you a good experience and make sure that their venue meets your needs. There's some marketing engagement questions here. I'll let Adam delve into that a little bit more, but this is where you can provide us information and links as well to things like trailers, images, reviews, and so forth. We ask that you try and link to that, try and keep that all together in like a Dropbox or a Google Drive link. I know Adam will probably cover that as well, and any other support material in terms of bios, artistic references, technical plans, and so forth that you might have. And down the bottom here is just a question which is around what you're interested in doing at Showcase. And it's really, again, just to kind of click checkbox. But there is some people will just do a straight pitch to the audience where you're standing at a lectern and talking about your production and giving a bit of a sales pitch to the room. Other shows will be interested in presenting a short excerpt of their work on stage. There's no right or wrong way to do that. It really depends on your production, where you're at with your show, what you feel might be most suitable for the type of work that you're presenting. Not every production is well suited to doing an excerpt in a context like Showcase. So maybe just talking about the work and perhaps showing some documentation might be easier. It really is up to you, but you can select one or both of those, and we can have further conversations about that if you're selected as part of the program as well. So that's the EOI form. And just to kind of go back to the top, and this link here to the selection guidelines, I will just click on here. And this document just gives a bit of information, a lot of which I've covered today, but you can refer to it if needed. It's got key dates and information in there. There is some information around eligibility, which is really that you meet the expectations for participating in an event like Showcase, and that you are you've gone to the effort to complete the EOI form properly and given us all the required information. And there's some guidelines that the selection panel will assess against as well. So these are some things to think about in terms of how you shape your application, the information that you give us. Do take the time to read through those. I won't read through all of them now, but they broadly cover artistic quality, innovation, viability of the project, diversity and accessibility. We, as I said earlier, want to make sure that the program that we put together for Showcase is representative of the broader performing arts industry and gives lots of variety to the sector when they're choosing for programming, and audience appeal and community engagement. So we want to make sure that the work is going to have appeal to audiences that make up the communities that our venues program for, and that there's going to be appetite for the work that we're putting into Showcase. There's a whole bunch of really good tips and advice and questions to think about as you do your EOI down through here. So I'd encourage you again to have a read of those and give some thought to how they fit with your production. And again, just some steps on how to apply. And it's just a reminder of the EOI closing date as well. So that's really an overview of what Showcase is, what you can expect this year. There may be questions as we go through. As I said, put those in the chat. And now I'll throw to Adam just to talk about the kind of marketing part of your EOI and some things to consider through that part of the process. Thanks, Adam.
Great, thanks so much, Patrick. Hi, everyone, welcome. So in terms of putting together the marketing materials, I thought I'd just briefly go through the marketing questions from the EOI and hopefully give you some useful tips on how to answer them. So the first chance you're really going to get to talk up your show and hopefully excite the panel is in that 200-word synopsis that Patrick was mentioning. People need to walk away from your synopsis with a really clear idea of what the work is and why an audience member might engage with it. So it's important to spend a bit of time on getting the synopsis right in particular. If it doesn't make sense or it doesn't zing enough, you're kind of falling at the first hurdle because it's one of the first impressions the panel is going to get about your show. And also your marketing skills, actually, which does get noticed. Here, I think you really want to aim for 4 to 5 tight, succinct paragraphs. One suggestion for the synopsis, which might be useful, is to try starting it with a marketing tagline. A good tagline can help give the panel a really quick flavour of your work, and Google is your friend here. So if you're not sure what a tagline is or how to write one, just have a search online for some free advice and you'll be able to work that out pretty quickly. Also, just quickly on the synopsis, don't spend too much time talking about the background of the work or the inspiration for the work. I would recommend trying to jump straight into the story or the concept of the show. Tell us what happens, tell us why we care. That will engage the panel and by extension, the audience the most. If you have a strong central premise or a question that you're exploring in your work, try and work that into the copy as well. Often ending your copy with a question can be a good way to do that. So that'll work for some shows better than others, but if that's an option, try that out as well. Also, matching the copy to the genre of your work is a good idea. So, for example, if you have a drama offering, make the copy a little bit more dramatic. If it's a comedy, add some humour. If it's a circus or a kids show, you might try and add some playfulness to the copy, that kind of thing. And the final, and I think probably the biggest tip I can give for the synopsis is to get people who know nothing about the show to read it once you've drafted it. We could often get so close to the work that we can't see the bleeding obvious sometimes. So I really recommend getting someone who's not familiar with the show to read the copy and give you some feedback. You'll often be surprised at what they come back to you with. That goes for the whole application in general, obviously, but especially for the synopsis, because it is such a vital question as part of the application. You then get another 200 words on top of that to explain why your work is appealing to audiences and some of the selling points. So what we're trying to do with this question is to get you to think about the types of people who have come to the show previously, or if it's a new work, who you might think will be attracted to that work. Once if it is a new work, you can think about who might be attracted to that work. And then once you've got those people in mind, try and think about what exactly attracted them to the work, or if it's a new work, what might attract them to come to the show. It could be the fact that it's a homegrown Australian story, might have an ending that changes every night, it might use technology in a cool way, it might explore topical or historical themes. They're the kind of things that are really good selling points and that the panel are looking for. One tip to kind of work out the selling points that I found really useful in the past is to think about the box office staff. So the box office staff usually have nothing to do with programming your show, but are often the people that are talking directly to the public about it. So think about what selling points you would give to the box office staff to help them sell your show. So what would they tell the public to entice them to buy a ticket? Essentially, that is the selling point. And thinking about it like that might help sort of unlock that a little bit for you. One thing I wanted to say was don't stress about trying to find the most unique selling points you've ever heard. Just try to nail the most obvious ones. And if you find yourself getting stuck, I really recommend jumping onto the Showcase website and have a look at what the performance profiles from last year's Showcase event and just seeing what other producers and artists are doing. That'll help you a lot by doing that. And finally, for the marketing component of the EOI, we do ask you to spend up to 100 words listing the target audience segments for your show. The aim here is to list the main audience segments that you believe will be attracted to your work. So think of audience segments like groups of people that share a common interest or a demographic. So fans of live music, under 30s, students, parents, audiences with English as a second language. These are all examples of audience segments that you could market your show towards if it's appropriate for your work. If your show is already premiered, you have the advantage of knowing who turned up to your show. So I would highly recommend using that information to help draw out these segments, and don't be afraid to get creative with it. For example, say you're pitching a murder mystery, an audience segment could be people who love true crime podcasts, for example. So you can go quite left field with it. I think the main thing though is to get the main audience segments for that show down in that answer. For the marketing links question in the EOI, you can submit, like Patrick said, you can submit up to 5 links, but I do recommend just linking to the one Google Drive or Dropbox with a folder for each different type of marketing collateral. So for your marketing collateral, I would aim to have separate folders for images, a really good promo video, probably around 60 to 90 seconds. Logos, bios, and reviews. A media release is great too if you've got one handy. Again, I suppose remembering that this is a competitive process, I would just encourage you to make sure that your marketing collateral is showcasing the best of your work. So often artists or producers might just dump all of their production images into the folder, and there might be, say, there could even be like 100 images, for instance. I would go through all of that and weed out any of the images that aren't really popping. So like put the 10 best images in there instead of every single image you got back from the photographer. That's just something that I find can help sort of heighten the quality of your application without you having to do much, is just by doing a bit of editing on the material that you already have. It's pretty brief, like the application is pretty brief marketing wise. So that's sort of, hopefully that's some useful tips. But if you do have any other questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end of this session. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Adam. Heaps of really good advice and information in there. Adam's been doing this stuff a long time and knows marketing and touring inside out. So lots of really good information there. I think just to emphasize that final point, just around having really strong content rather than a lot. So quality over quantity is really the way to go in terms of marketing, in terms of just for information about when the assessment panel go through that. As I said before, they could have anywhere up to around 150 applications to look through. So as Adam said, if you can just click on one link and see everything neatly in there, and there's not heaps of different photos and images and stuff that's been dumped in there without a lot of thought, if it's just neat and clear and has a really high level of quality to it, that's immediately going to make your application stand out above the pack. Marketing, having quality marketing material cannot overstate how important it is in terms of the venue's perspective, because when venues are considering programming something, a big thing that they are thinking about is how easy or not is this going to be to sell to our audience and our community where we are. And if the marketing material is really strong, that immediately becomes less work for them. A lot of the venues will not have the capacity to work with you to improve your marketing later or to adapt your marketing to their needs. They want it to be ready to go. And if it can be ready to go at this stage of the EOI process, that makes a huge difference in terms of where you might rank in the overall consideration. And it can be the difference if there's 2 shows or maybe even 10 shows that are of kind of similar quality in terms of their artistic merit, but one show has stronger marketing material, the panel's going to pick the one with the stronger marketing material. So it is an easy way to kind of set yourself apart. We know it does take a bit of resources, but you can, as I said, you don't have to produce an enormous volume. It's more just about getting a small amount right. So thanks again, Adam, for covering all of that. If anyone has any marketing related questions, chuck them in the chat and we will come back to those at the end. I'm going to throw now to the wonderful Bindi to talk about some of the kind of technical elements and some of the things you might want to consider in your EOI in terms of the practical considerations of touring as well. Thanks, Bindi.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Adam. It is so exciting. Can I just start by saying it's so exciting to see so many people here and that we are all coming back together again to talk about putting shows and setting them out in the world is beyond thrilling. I'm very excited. The showcase is bigger and back. Just having a look through the touring tech questions. So this is where we turn from talking about the art of the work of the audience experience. Now we're going to be thinking more about what's the venue's experience of having you come to be part of their program. So focusing more on the nuts and bolts, the practicalities of what it's going to take for them to put your show on in terms of their resources and their time and their people. So I might just go through the questions and that'll lead us through to a few additional comments. Venue format. For those of you who kind of not familiar with these are all different kind of styles of performance spaces. So Senior March is quite familiar. A lot of you will be familiar with. That's more of like the main stage traditional show where the audience is quite separate from the stage area. The Proscenium March is kind of referring to the border around the sides and the top of the stage that you kind of like that frames the performance for the audience. That's a front-on performance style, whereas compared to say like a thrust stage, which is where the staging and performance area protrudes or projects out into where the audience, so you might have audience on the sides. Black box kind of is more your studio spaces, so they're more your smaller spaces. You might not necessarily have walls, you just have some curtains or wings. They're usually much more flexible, so you can set that space up in a multitude of different ways. In the round is more of the style of, there's a lot of circus do in the round where you've got audience literally on all sides, pretty much except for a little bit of backstage. These things have become important because it's all about what are you comfortable, what sort of space are you comfortable presenting your show in. If you've got shadow puppetry or you've got a magic show, you might really or projections, you might really rely on having that front-on approach. So you don't want audience sort of sneaking around the side of the performance space. So you would not tick on that thrust stage. If you're a much more experimental kind of show, if you're a dance show, circus, you might be really happy to be on a thrust stage or in the round where you can put audiences on every side. Family shows are a bit like that as well. What you're really thinking about now is when you're answering these questions is, all right, what are all the, what's the minimum requirements I need to be able to present this show? Any others there? The other ones are all pretty much straightforward. Outdoor, flat floor. Hall is usually referring to like the town halls or community halls, where they might not have a lot of infrastructure. They might have just a few lights on stands, maybe a basic PA, but they might not have it. It's much more like going into your local country town hall. So that's great for a lot of music works, for some kids shows and family shows that don't rely on a lot of the bells and whistles of a performing arts centre to be able to present that work. Touring party number, that's referring to how many people you need to have, how many people are in the company that's touring around. So if you've got a cast of 3 and you're also touring like a stage manager or a lighting tech, that becomes, or a company stage manager who looks after all the tech things, that becomes a tour party number of 4. So it's how many people are actually out of the road as opposed to how many people it takes to put the show on. Bump in time. So this is where we're thinking about how much time it's going to take for you to get your show up and ready for an audience from the time you arrive through to when you're ready to have an audience come in and watch the show. Bump in time gives the venues a sense of the scale of the show. So we've had a variety of different shows. We've had a show that's gone out that's only needed 1 hour bumping. They just kind of turn up and they use the standard rig and they have no set. So they can kind of just come in and work out where they're going to stand and work out how to turn things on. And then that's pretty much, they're ready to go. Compared to a show that might need like a day and a half because they've got a lot of elements within their set that needs setting up. They've got a lot of quite specific, tricky things within their tech requirements. So bumping time, you're thinking about how much time do I need to do my lighting? How much time do I need for sound? How much time what do we need to rehearse at each space? So if you're looking at doing like a 7 o'clock show and your show kind of needs 5 hours of bumping, it helps to kind of think, well, we don't want to be arriving at 2. You want to be arriving there a little bit earlier because your bump in time needs to kind of allow for, think about making some space for breaks and for arrival. And that can help you to lead you to putting together a little schedule for how you're going to spend that time in every venue. It's a really useful thing for venues. get a sense of what your schedule is while you're there. And I'd highly recommend having that as a little template that sits in your tech specs. So, you know, company arrives, 1 hour for unloading the van, setting up the set on stage, maybe 2 hours for lighting, 1 hour for sound check, 1 hour for tech rehearsal, and then an hour and a half break for meals and pre-show prep. And that gives them a sense of how much time they need to allocate in the venue for your show to come in, how much time of crew they need to roster, how much of their resources they need to commit to hosting your show in the space. The other thing I would recommend for this question is thinking about some contingency time. So allowing every venue is going to have slightly different challenges. You're wanting to hopefully you'll be touring to multiple venues around the state, and every venue is going to be a slightly different experience because no two theatres are the same. So there'll be some kind of contingency, there'll be some kind of time that you need to have to solve a problem, to work out how you get that set element through the doors, or how to get that tricky lighting angle, or there's a weird bit of sound feedback that's coming through. There'll always be something at each venue to solve. So in your bump-in time, make sure you kind of allow for a little bit of contingency to resolve problems and sort through some of those questions. Minimum stage dimensions. So that's thinking about what's the smallest kind of sized performance space that you can comfortably present your show. Thinking about the width, how much space does my company need to perform this, how much to perform, how much do the dancers need for the choreography, how much space does the set take up, how much distance do I need from my on-stage projector to the screen. All of those elements which are kind of non-negotiables that you need to be able to replicate in multiple venues. What's kind of the smallest you can squish down to. The thinking about the depth as well, like how much space going back. And usually it's minimum stage dimensions will also include height as well to the grid. That's thinking about how tall elements are of your set, thinking about circus performances when you might have performers doing tricks or doing juggling, standing 3 people, one on each other's shoulders. What's the lowest that you can cope with a roof and to be able to actually present the show as you want to present it. The other thing I would say is that there's a lot of kind of information you're trying to convey in these very few text fields. So definitely make use of that support material box further down to be able to expand and flesh out the requirements of your show and provide a bit more detail on the tech specs that your show needs. The other thing that you can consider including in that document is just a little line to reflect that you're thinking about being flexible and you're thinking about being scalable. So you can put down what you think you're going to need, but adding a little line into your tech requirements saying these are the ideal requirements for a main stage theatre. Other options are possible depending on negotiation with the producer. So that just having a line like that in just to qualify, saying these are not absolute 100% must-haves, but there's a bit of flexibility there. There's a bit of room to negotiate. We're willing to talk to you. Can just open up a whole lot more opportunity for you to connect with different venues and different spaces. When you're thinking about your tech specs, I recommend, same as Adam, like have a look on Showcase Victoria. You can go on and see, have a look at the touring shows that are listed there this year. A lot of companies as well. You can do some benchmarking and think about who's a company that's touring a show that's kind of practically like mine. It's a family show. It's got 3 performers. It's got a few tricks. It's got a few bit of sound. That company's doing things like me. Have a look on, often companies will have their own tech specs up on their websites. So it's good to you can kind of have a little comparison and see how other people talk about shows when you're new to putting these together. Some of the things you want to cover in a tech spec document will be like set and staging, a bit like we talked about before, the width, the depth, the height, but just expanding on that and thinking about, do I need some wing space to store a lot of props? Do I need a green room for the band for all of their instruments, cases? Do we need to access the fly system? Do we need rigging for our circus performers? So thinking about letting the venues know what are the things I'm going to need. What are the things that I need the venue to provide? And then again, what are the things that I'm touring with that I can provide myself for putting these shows on? And that kind of applies across the tech spec document. So thinking about lighting requirements, thinking about sound, thinking about vision and projection systems, making sure you're including in your documents what's the absolute essential non-compromise things for your show. For one show, you might definitely need three spotlights coming straight down over the performers. That's an integral artistic element of the show, as are the 14 subwoofers that you have surrounding the performance space. Sometimes venue, whatever you have as your specialty, no negotiable, we have to have this for this show to work. Can be a problem for some venues to supply if it's quite specialty, like 14 subs. It's pretty unrealistic, but maybe that's the core element of that dance work. Think about those sorts of elements that maybe they become things that you tour with rather than that you rely on the presenters to provide. Because once you get out into those smaller towns and smaller communities, they're not always going to have access to a lot of that specialty equipment. It can be really useful just to tour with that yourself. You've got some consistency in your presentations across the tour, and you're bringing something new and interesting and exciting to those venues as well. For lighting, highly recommend thinking about how to adapt your show, how to utilize standard rigs across the venues in the tour. Think of, like, it does have an impact and makes it a bit easier on your company, on your tour party, if you're not constantly having to focus 43 lights every time you go into a space. If you know that most venues are going to have a standard rig that kind of covers the basic wash across their stage, and you can rely on that, you can then spend some time just tweaking those half a dozen specials that are going to make all the difference for your show. It just cuts down the time for your tour party as well in the space. And when you're doing 3 or 4 bump-ins in a week in a tour, it's pretty hard work. It can be pretty exhausting. It's pretty great, but it can be pretty tiring. So it just helps to make it a little bit easier on your team as well. The last one I would think about is, I'd recommend including in your requirements is just being clear about what your crew requirements are from the venue. So how many do you need for bumping in, and what sort of role do they play? So for a lot of music shows, a lot of music acts will tour with their own sound engineer because they know the performers, they know how to get the best quality sound, but they'll rely on a venue to provide a lighting operator. In theatre, it's a bit more the reverse. The lighting can be a much more integral part of telling the story of a theatre show, and they might ask for the venue to provide a sound engineer, a sound operator, or someone to just be on standby for mics and manage the desk, because the stage manager can operate sound cues. So it's thinking about what's going to work best for your show, what can you do yourself at each venue, and what are you going to need support? Because as the venues, presenters are looking at the profiles and looking at the shows, they're kind of calculating they're thinking about, all right, how many people do we need to put this show on? How much time do we need to have the venue available? All of those things become part of the decision-making process when they're putting a program together. I think that's probably a good place for me to hand back, because I'm probably going to go well over time. But yeah, thinking about flexibility, thinking about scalability, thinking about really understanding your own project and what's core and essential, and how can you streamline your experience in a tour, and how do you reflect that in a tech specs document.
Thanks so much, Brindy. Lots of really good information and insight there into what venues are looking for, and some little ways you might go about thinking about making your show appealing to venues through that process as well. And to reiterate what Bindi said, really good reference point is to go and look at what other shows that have been part of the Showcase program have done, And in particular, probably a really good thing to do is if you part of the sector, you're probably seeing what's being announced for programming for 2023 and so forth. So you can see which shows actually got picked up and have a look at both their marketing and their tech specs and kind of benchmark yourself against those. It's a good tactic. I'm going to throw to Celia now to talk a little bit about budgeting. We don't ask for full budgets as part of the EOI process, but you should have a pretty clear idea of what your budget might look like for touring. There's a few figures we asked for, so Celia will offer a bit of insight into maybe how to think about those and how you might come up with those figures. Thanks, Celia. I think you might be on mute.
That'd be right. Starting on mute. Hi, everyone. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Celia Wordsworth, and I'm the producer of Showcase. I was previously the producer, but yeah, never got to actually do the event. So I'm rapt to be back to do this, to actually bring the event to the venues, because we've all had such a full-on couple of years. So it's really exciting, and good on you guys for all still being here. So to begin with, who's really overwhelmed? Because it is a lot, isn't it? It's a lot. And look, I just want to say, you can totally like pick up the phone and call like Bindi or Adam or me, depending on what your, question is, and we could refer one another around, because yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of sitting down with someone and going through it. So yeah, don't stress too much about it. But yeah, it's really important that the information that goes into your application is the correct information, because this application is going to become your profile. So it's been mentioned a couple of times. Go and have a look at the profiles on the Facebook, on the Showcase Victoria website. Go and have a look at the 2022 profiles, and you will see what we're looking for. And it's basically the application. So is your show tour ready? If you don't have all the information required for the EOI, then you're not tour ready, in a nutshell. So you need to get all of this stuff done. In saying that, if for instance, like you are planning on having some photos taken and you can't, you haven't managed to do that yet, I'm pretty sure you could give some, ideas of marketing materials and some mock-ups or something like that. I'm just, but like try and get as much of the material together as you can. And if you, because I will say that the standard is really high. Like there's a lot of really, so make sure that you, and also I was going to say too, fill out the application, because it'll give you a really good idea, and just as a good practice for next year. Like you might not be, you'll go, oh, I'm interested in doing it, but I'm not quite ready. Come along to the event, have a look at what it's all about, and then keep working on your application for next year. Because yeah, that's all the stuff we're going to need. So looking at the budget, obviously the budget can be really overwhelming for a lot of people. The people that are obviously experienced with this sort of stuff won't need these explanations. So I'm just going to give the basics. And if you need more detail or more help with it, you can give me a call. And I'm not sure, because I haven't been added to my phone number's not on the website yet, but you can find me on Instagram too, Celia Wordsworth Producer. It's easy. And you can message me there if you have any specific questions. There's also Auspicious Arts. So back to the application. Looking at what we're asking for is weekly sell-off fees, remount, and per performance fee. So I'll just go through each of these and explain basically what they all are, so that you've got an idea of what you need to include on this application. The first thing is, we're not asking for any tour costs, no on-road costs. It's literally just your fee as the producer or as the artist, what you need to have this show on the road for a week. So it depends on who you're paying. So if you sort of are, like maybe you're just a simple two-hander, it's all an in-house thing and it's really easy for you, and you know what you need, to pay and what your running costs are for the week and your performance fees. sorry, not your running costs. I don't want to confuse anyone. No tour costs need to be included. It's literally just your fee. If you were looking at getting a producer, and I'll come to that in a minute, or a tour coordinator, you would want to include 20% in that. Like, just bear in mind, yeah, that's usually, so you might want to include that in your weekly fee. How you come up with your weekly fee, it might just be performance fees. You might own all of your gear, or you might need to actually buy some more stuff so that's going to be in your remount. Your weekly fee is literally just your performance fees, and anything that you need to get that performance, like any people you need to hire and all that sort of stuff, will be included in your weekly seller fee. If you need any more clarification on how to come up with your weekly seller fee, you can contact, but it's basically your performance fee. Then all of your tour costs, which would be your accommodation, your accommodation, your vehicle, your flights, all of that sort of, there's not flights, this is Victoria. But all of those costs are going to be covered by your producer, your tour coordinator, if you get a tour with RAV, or there are other tour coordinators and other producers that do tours that you can connect with at Showcase Victoria. So yeah, just in your weekly fee, consider where you're at. If you need help, you can always ring. Your remount, you might have zero remount. Your show might be ready to go. It's really simple. It's all good to go. Your remount might would include anything that you need to do to get the show tour ready again. So you might need another rehearsal period. You might need a rehearsal period. That would include, you would have to think about things like your venue hire, paying your performers. If you need to get information on what you need to pay performers, you can go to the LPA, has all of the fees. It can be very overwhelming, that sort of stuff, but just take it one step at a time, and there is help available. So your remount is basically going to be anything that you need to get the show ready, whether it's making sets or buying gear or anything like that, any of the stuff that Bindi talked about that you need for your tech, all of that sort of stuff. And sometimes it's worth too, just considering things in your budget. Like, if you can provide, if this is a Victorian tour, if you can provide part of the audio gear, and it's easier for you to throw your audio gear in the back of the car and do part, that brings your fees down. And in some cases, I've found this touring myself, it makes it easier. Then factor all that sort of stuff in. And you can also have a range. So you could, I'm not sure if you can have a range, as in, like, I'm not sure if the application will allow you to, but you could also mention somewhere in your application that you can do a stripped back version of your show. And some artists or acts have two different names for the show. So it might be, I did one this year. What was it? I can't. Oh, it was Work It. I'm going to get this wrong, but I did the tour for Work It for Circus Trick Tees, and they had Work It, and then I'm pretty sure they had Work It Lightweight. I think that's wrong, but it was basically, it didn't include all of the technical elements, but they were able to go into more remote parts of the country and provide a show that is every bit as great, but they just couldn't provide maybe the aerial or something like that. So yeah, just think about ways that your show could be simplified, and there are opportunities for that too through RAV. So make sure you're on the mailing list for everybody. Theatre Network Australia are great. Make sure you're on everyone's mailing list so you're getting all of the dates for all the other opportunities. So your remount is basically anything that you need to do to get this show tour ready. And your per performance fee. Oh, you don't have to put this one in, I don't think, do you? I'm pretty sure you can leave it. But if you want to, this is what I would suggest. If you're going to put a performance fee in there, I would include, this is a Victorian these are all the Victorian venues. They're not ever going to be too far. It's not like you have to think about like traveling with Perth. But if you're going to put a performance fee, I think add a bit of travel in there, because I've had, because if venues look at it and think, oh, well, that's the per performance, and then you're, I don't know, what do you think, Bindi? Is that I would I was just interested. I would just add a bit of buffer in there for the per performance. I've just seen artists, not include all of the things that they have to do just to go out to one venue. And it's going to be a lot more than your weekly. I'll give you an example. Like, say a little two-hander show might be like, $3,500 for a 1 day traveling in Victoria. They might go stay overnight, do the show or whatever and come back. And then the weekly fee might be $10,000. I don't know. It's going to depend on the show, but I'm just giving you that example to say, really you have to, if you're going to put a per performance fee, what we're actually looking at here is to go out somewhere in Victoria for 1 day. And I think you'd be wise to include some of your travel fees, because if you get one venue that's interested, you want to be able to independently go out to that venue and, it's going to be on the website. So make that one. I would really be thinking about that. I think I've covered everything. Basically the main thing that there's 3. Sorry, Bindi.
I was just going to say, I'll just answer a couple of questions in the chat. So just in terms of per diems, allowances, they are a travel cost. So they are something that you can apply to Touring Victoria Fund, to Creative Vic Fund Touring Victoria for. Because they don't apply when your company is doing metro shows, and you're all staying at home. So remembering that you're pitching to a whole bunch of metro venues as well as a whole bunch of regional venues. So touring might not always mean traveling. You could have a tour that all exists within metropolitan Melbourne potentially. RAV contribution to the tour it will vary depending on the nature of the agreements we have with each company we have on the road. Will vary slightly depending on whether it's a national tour, whether it's funded by, like on how each tour individually is funded. But generally, yes, we will fund and cover the travel costs associated with the tours that we present. So which includes the accommodation, vehicle hire, fuel, allowances for when the company is staying away. So that's what we mean when we talk about travel costs. It doesn't include wages. It doesn't include any costs of the show being on stage. We think about it as being the stage door is kind of the division between what RAV covers and what the producer covers. Once you're in the venue, any costs associated with having that show on that stage is covered by the producer and covered by presenter fees, which is, that those costs are covered by presenter fees that you generate. The travel costs for the tours that we do are covered by our touring funding.
Thanks, Bindi, and thanks, Celia. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Celia, before we wrap up?
I was just going to say too, so in this one, we're asking just for your performance bit. I just like that thing with splitting it, because any sort of funding you go for, they will split it up. So generally speaking, the presenter fee, the presenters will all pay a fee for your show, will cover your fees generally, and then hopefully there's funding. But sometimes we do have, this is more with independent touring, so not through the RAV model. You can actually just include it all in your weekly fee and put together, like maybe 3 venues and things like that. So that's possible to do yourself too after the showcase. That makes sense.
Celia. A lot of good examples there of just the different variations. There's no one size fits all approach in terms of touring. Some people will tour, they'll just go and do a one-off performance at one venue. Other people might be on the road for weeks at a time. And so this model of kind of coming up with these figures is largely based around that. And I might just quickly share my screen once more in the resources of resources section of the website. There is a budget template that you can look at. It looks like this. Hopefully you can all see that on my screen. But this is just an example of kind of what Celia's just kind of talked through, and it's a really good place to start if you haven't put together this sort of budget before. But you can see here, as Celia described, remount or production costs. This is everything to kind of get the show up and running and tour ready. So that might be fees for re-rehearsal, purchasing more costumes or wardrobe, or reconstructing your set. And you'll have a kind of fixed fee for what that looks like. Down here, you've got your weekly costs. There's a bit of description here of what this is. And as Celia described, everything while you're on tour in terms of weekly fees per performer and those sorts of things. As Bindi talked about, certain equipment that you might potentially have that might be on a per week basis rather than something that you've purchased. There's a section down here that covers royalties as well that you might want to consider if you've got royalties to a playwright or to a creative team in general. And these figures are what you would input into the EOI form. And that's really what we're asking you to come with. So this is a really good place to formulate those figures if you haven't done so before. And then ultimately the venues will interpret that information. They'll know, there might be this many venues required in terms of a viable tour being put together at those sorts of figures. They'll be able to then calculate roughly, and also, as Bindi talked about earlier, based on things like how long you're going to be in the venue, how many staff they might need to put on, what it's going to cost them to actually get your show in. And then they'll have an idea then of how many tickets they might need to sell for that to be viable, and so forth. So I'll stop sharing that now, but that resource is a really good place to start in budgeting if you haven't done this before. And as you said, if you've got any questions throughout the process, you can come back to us on those, and we can try and provide some more information. I will just go back and just make sure we've answered every question. I think Dawn made a really good point that if you're an artist who's based regionally, you might have touring costs and so forth. If you're traveling to Metro, it doesn't always work one way and back the other. So it's really just thinking about where you're based, but that's why we have those fixed remount costs and then touring costs, because then you can kind of calculate how long you might be on the road for once you know how many venues are interested. In terms of detail, I think Nancy's asked about how much needs to be included in EOI. We don't ask for a full budget like that at this stage. If you have one, that's great. You can attach that as support material. We don't expect you to have a complete one at this stage, but we'd like you to have a pretty reasonable idea, or at least to us to be able to kind of get a sense as the assessment panel that the figures you've put in as your weekly sell-off and your remount costs are accurate. So anything you can put in that supports that shows us that you've put thought and time into calculating these figures, and that if we're going to put these towards venues, that they're going to get accurate figures, that really supports and strengthens your application, because it allows us to go, yes, we can put this forward with confidence for purchasing from presenters. It's a really not a great experience for presenters if they come and express interest in your show based on figures you've provided. And then when you get towards actually doing contracts, you say, actually, we can't deliver the tour for this amount. It's going to cost this much instead. That's really not a great look from a producer or artist perspective. And it can be a little bit harmful to the relationship, and tours can fall over if people haven't properly calculated these things. So do please try and put a bit of time into getting these figures as accurate as you can at this stage, based on the information that you have available.
I was just going to say on that.
Sorry,
Patrick, I just wanted to say too, with your figures, also just round up. Like, you don't have to be too particular about it. I always just round up, because you do need to add contingency, so just a little bit more than you think it's going to be, and just round it up. Yeah,
that's a good approach to take. So, and likewise with these budget figures, I think if you're putting together your budget, as has been talked about before, you might go for something like Touring Victoria funding later on, or you might be hoping that RAV can support the tour, or whatever it might look like. If any of those things don't eventuate, it's good to have a little bit of a buffer to cut. But again, I would recommend benchmark against what was in Showcase Productions last year. So all the fees are on the website. You can see what each show put in for their weekly sell-off and their remount fees. benchmark your show against those to see what's going to be competitive, but also realistic. Tim's asked, are all shows purchased, or might some venues offer a ticket split or another agreement? Potentially, we did talk about this at a recent VAPAC meeting. I think most venues indicated that they're happy to have conversations around these sorts of arrangements. It may depend where in your program they sit. So there might be an area of the program, if they're a funded venue that's funded by Creative Victoria in receipt of regional partnerships funding, for instance, where they're happy just to kind of pay that fee and buy your show in. There may be other venues that, or in different circumstances, where they're happy to negotiate a different sort of arrangement. That will really depend venue to venue, and the conversations you could have after you know which, if you're successful and you come to showcase, which venues have expressed interest in programming your work. You can have those conversations. You can also have those conversations at Showcase. It's a really good opportunity to get face-to-face with venues and talk about what they're after and what kind of approach they're interested in taking. And that might potentially open other doors to your show touring than just being sold outright. So that's a good question. Thanks, Tim. Sheps asks, how many shows a week would it be for a weekly fee? The RAV team might be better to answer this, but I think it probably varies a little bit per show, and some of that might depend on how quickly it bumps in and out and can travel. Bindi, Adam, do you have more insight on that, or Celia?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the show, and also, I mean, Victoria, when the venues are also close together, so I think it really just depends on the bump in time. Like if a show takes like a whole day to bump in, then obviously you'd be looking at no more than 3 a week tops. Yeah,
you kind of have to figure it out in reverse. You think about, okay, well, what does it cost me as a company to have my group out on the road for a week? What does it cost for my wages? What does it cost for show costs? What does it cost what is the cost of the company? And then you figure out, well, okay, so it's going to cost me $5,000 to keep my tour party of 2 people out on the road. And then you can, in some ways, that can be helpful as a way to start working out what your show fees are, because then you can go, well, all right, well, how you have to think about how many shows can you do in a week? How far do you need to travel? We generally wouldn't do more than, we'd really struggle with doing 5 venues in a week. You might get one venue who wants to book you for 2 or 3 days, and that's so you could kind of charge them half a weekly fee. And you sort of generate you generate that weekly fee based on how many shows you can do and how many you're comfortable doing. So if your weekly fee is $5,000, you get 3 people who are interested and can afford to buy it for $2,000 each, then you only need to do 3 shows that week. You can also, you know, if you've got time and capacity, you can do a 4th show in that week. Because when we talk about touring and shows, often sometimes each show, a lot of venues will only put your show on once. So a lot of this kind of touring, especially the touring that we kind of do, they don't necessarily have the audiences in and the engagement, especially coming back after COVID. It's still a bit of there's still a little bit of hesitancy in some audiences to come back to big public spaces. It's definitely changing and shifting. The big outdoor gigs are popular, but coming back into indoor theatres, it's going to be interesting to see how they go. But to be able to, in a 500-seat theatre, to try and get 2 full houses to come to a show, they're not going to be able to necessarily get that many people to come to do 2 shows. So they'll book your show for 1 day. They'll just book for 1 day. So you might 3 shows a week doesn't sound like much, but that's 3 bump ins, 3 bump outs, 3 sets of travel. It's sort of thinking about touring a little bit differently.
Thanks, Bindi. I'm just conscious of time, so I might whip through the remaining questions relatively quickly. Ben's asked a question around including things like community engagement and workshops while performing in the area. Absolutely, speak to that in your EOI if that is something that you offer. That can be appealing. Try and be specific about what you would do and who you would want to engage with. A kind of general note about we'll run workshops is not necessarily that useful, but if you could be clear on exactly what you might be offering, which parts of the community and how you would go about engaging with them, because venues won't always have the capacity to do that work for you. So they'll be wanting to know about how you plan to engage with that part of their community and deliver that while you're there. But yeah, absolutely, you can talk about that in the EOIs.
I was
No,
just
sorry,
going to
go
say
ahead,
on the community engagement.
Yep.
Sorry, Patrick. I just wanted to say too on that, think about what you have that's unique that you're taking into these towns, because you might not think it's unique, but in some areas they haven't, you know, ever met a circus performer, for example, you know. So if you had a special, and you could run those kinds of workshops, or even just as a touring artist, you know, a lot of times we've gone and done like master classes with year 12 students and things like that. So there's lots of different ways, is all just wanted to mention.
Yeah,
So think about that.
A couple of really
Appealing.
good examples there of what you might offer. Thanks, Celia. Caroline's asked around showcase in terms of the time frame. So is the touring in 2024, is 2024 already booked and venues are looking further out? Now, absolutely, I would expect that shows are coming to Showcase 23 looking to program for 2024. They may be looking for 2025 as well. Some may even have spots available towards the end of 2023 that they're still looking to fill, or something's fallen over, or they might have a more flexible approach to programming now than they did pre-COVID. A lot of venues are trying to be a bit more flexible in their approach, particularly if you're a smaller show. There might be something that they can pick up and program at the end of the year. But mostly I would think for kind of 2024 and some 2025 that they'd be coming to look for at Showcase this year. Joe Porter has asked a question around royalties and what is manageable, acceptable. I would just say benchmark against the productions from last year. There's probably no fixed rule on that, but usually you'll see in the profiles from last year, shows will include if they've got a royalty as part of their fees. So you can go through and see what other shows are doing, and I would probably use that as a guide. And it really, again, depends on what your production's needs are, and I would just be as accurate and honest as you can about that, rather than surprising anyone later.
There is an element in that budget template to help you try and figure out royalties as well. Yeah, and just I think with royalties too, just say, don't just put in a blanket number without being able to defend it and explain what it's for. Like venues that will sometimes ask, they, especially council run venues, the venue managers might be required to actually really do some digging and identify, well, what can you give me a breakdown of what these royalties are going towards? Because and the venues completely understand that there are creative people whose work has gone into these shows and are entitled to compensation for their work that continues to generate income. However, if I think there's a spirit around royalties which it's good to be. There's a spirit of goodwill about not trying to just put a bunch of royalties in there just to try and make a bit of extra money, because venues are kind of relying on that box office income as well. So it's absolutely part of the negotiation, but it's I think we'll just be a little bit wary of just putting, oh, it's 10% and that's what it is, and there's no explanation for why it's at 10%. Anywhere sort of between 5 and 12% is kind of fairly is not out of the ordinary. But yeah, I think we're starting to see it creep in a little bit more and a little bit more of just being, I think it's just let's respect each other in terms of making our royalty arrangements that we continue to honour.
Thanks, Bindi. And there's just a question from Nicole around the recording, whether that will be available after today's session. Absolutely, we'll make it available. I think we'll try and add it to both the VAPAC and RAV websites as soon as humanly possible, and you can watch this back. That pretty much brings us to a close today. Thanks so much for being involved. Just to kind of reiterate a couple of things, applications will close on February 6th at 11:59 p.m. So you've got until the end of that night. Please do not wait until the last minute. If you have questions to ask us, you can contact the VAPAC team, contact Celia or myself, or you can contact the RAV team and direct your question where you think is most appropriate, and we'll give you as much information as we can. But please do make the effort to read through all the information on the Showcase website first. There is a lot of frequently asked questions on the website that will answer a lot of general inquiries. We'll have the recording from this session. There are a whole bunch of resources around marketing and budget templates, as we looked at before. and other examples of things that you can include in terms of support material. And as I said, all of the profiles from 2022 are still up there, and they are one of, if not your best resource for looking at what will get you over the line, what the kind of standard is for getting into Showcase. As Celia said, the standard is quite high. There's a lot of really extraordinary work out there, and really more than we can take into the program. But if you put your best foot forward, you give yourself the best opportunity to be involved. Thanks so much to Adam and Celia and Bindi for sharing their knowledge today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Good luck with your EOIs. We look forward to reading them. See you next time.